meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you're going to hear from men and women who've experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers or foster parents, or other people who are here to bring you hope and encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share with a friend. Remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. Well, Tina, I'm really happy to have you on the show today. 20 years ago, you were adopted out of foster care with your brother, and I am very thankful to hear your story and also hear your perspective. So let's start right here. What do you remember about your early childhood?
Well, thank you for having me. I am thankful to be able to share my story. And I like to say this at the beginning, but I'm going to be sharing my perspective. I don't want to speak for my brother,
Yep.
so I'm speaking from my perspective. I'm not speaking for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
I feel
Yep.
like that's really important. And I mean, my earliest memories, I don't really have memories. I have early feelings, which I think sometimes is very different. But I just remember feeling very scared, unsure, alone. I had those feelings, and then I later read in my paperwork of being left alone in places, and it kind of connected those dots for me of times of being left alone, and that was primarily in foster care. And so I think it was a very rough start. It was not ideal. There were a lot of things that happened in what I call early babyhood that should never happen to a child. And so, I mean, primarily negative, just not good.
Do you remember when you first went into foster care?
I actually don't remember that moment specifically, but I was actually recently in therapy, and I shared this on my Instagram, but I'll share it here too. Um, I'm not going to share what it is, but there is a day-to-day activity that most people call routine. And for me, I had found that it was extremely triggering in the sense that like elevated heart rate, like just unnecessarily nervous. And then since I have just reunified with my birth mom in September, I have the ability to text her. So I texted her and I asked her, "Hey, was removal did removal happen around this event?" And she said yes. And immediately those dots were connected for me. And that just blows my mind that, I was only like a few months old and my body
Wow.
remembers, my soul remembers that. And so now, and like, I think that is a question answered, but it's also like, that's so hard. It's so heavy.
Yeah.
So I think my body remembers it more than my mind does, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. Do you remember then, when do you first remember being in foster care? And kind of, you said, so a lot of your negative childhood was actually in foster care.
Yes. I'll just say right now, like if you've experienced foster care or abuse, like this is going to be hard. I think one of my earliest memories of foster care, my first one that comes to mind is being locked outside. My foster mom, she did not like me. I was and I still am, a very strong-willed person, and that was extremely highlighted by the abuse and neglect and trauma that I had experienced. And if you parent children or take care of children, you know that, right? Um, and so I remember being locked outside because she didn't like me and I was doing something that she didn't want me to do. And I was just outside. And I remember there was big dog next door, and I thought that he was going to eat me. Probably wasn't, but I thought he was because he just kept barking and barking at me. And then I also remember riding in the car with her and just crying in the car, and then her turning around and hitting me. Um, I remember several other instances as well of her physically abusing me because I wasn't doing what she wanted me to do. So those are kind of the memories that stand out in my mind of foster care.
Wow.
And I mean, I'll put in a little note here about my brother. I've talked with him about those things, and he says that he actually does remember standing there and watching me being hurt, but he didn't know what to do. And he's younger than me.
He's younger.
Yeah.
Wow. So how long were you in that home? Were you in multiple homes in your stay in foster care?
I was put into foster care pretty soon after I was born first, and then my brother was born, but he was premature, and he didn't really ever make it home because there were complications over there. But yeah, this was the home that we were in for the majority of the time.
Wow.
And it was a therapeutic foster home, which means that it was a foster home for children with high needs because we had a lot of needs.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So then eventually you were adopted out of foster care. Do you remember first meeting your now adoptive parents?
I remember meeting my dad. I remember that because excuse me. He's a man, and I was always kind of afraid of men. And he has a beard, and that was kind of intimidating to me. But I remember that he was just very kind to me, which was something that I hadn't really experienced from adults. So that was very foreign to me. Like I had seen my foster mom be kind to me in front of the social workers, but I didn't believe it, you know. But I remember he was kind to me, and that was really important to me. But I was, of course, still on edge about him.
Yeah.
But I remember that, and then by the time my family met us, they knew that they were going to adopt us.
Okay.
Just because they had seen everything that we had been through, and they knew that we weren't the kind of children that they could. I mean, I don't think anyone should,
Yeah.
commit to children and then go back on it. But they
Yeah.
were very much like, we can't put these kids through anything else. And so they were very firm in these are our children by the time they met us. So you know how you have like that 6-month waiting period after, even in foster care, before you can adopt. So I remember in that 6-month period of waiting, I had a lot of night terrors and nightmares and things like that. I would just wake up screaming and crying. And I remember my dad, he would just let me lay on his belly and just scream for hours. And he would just like hold me, and he would like tell me, he'd be like, okay, like I'm gonna put my hands on you now. And he was very like I was a child who had experienced abuse. Like I believe that when you're dealing with a child like that, you have to announce what you're going to do, and you have to reassure that it's safe. And I remember him doing those things. And I remember my mom trying to hold me and being like, I'm here to keep you safe. I'm not here to hurt you. I know you don't want me to do this, but you need me to do this. And she was right. Like I was 5 years old and I had nobody hold me like that.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, that was my next question was going to be how old were you? So you were 5. And
Yeah.
how old was your brother?
He was
at
4.
4. Okay.
Yeah, we're a year and 10 days apart.
Okay. Were there any other kids in the family?
Not that we knew of.
No, I'm sneezing.
Okay.
Okay. No, what I mean is, I'll start this over. Were there any other kids in your adoptive family?
Oh, yes. My parents had 4 older girls in the family at that time. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So how was that meeting new siblings?
Um, I mean, we were the babies, so they just kind of babied us. They
Mm-hmm.
just really wrapped around us, and we were the center of the family.
Yeah.
And it sounds kind of like, oh, your life can't stop. Like, I talked to my mom now, and she was like, our lives had to stop. Like, as soon as we met you all, we knew that you all needed, like, love that you had never experienced before. Um, and yeah, so she was like, it took a lot of grace-filled parenting that she didn't have to do with the four older girls.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was very different with us, she said. So yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Wow. There was a day, Tina, that you were driving in the car with your dad during an especially hard time for you, and he really spoke truth in life to you. Talk about that and what that meant to you.
Yeah, so that was such an important moment in my life. I believe I was a teenager, and I think the teenager years are hard, like period.
Yeah.
And then you add trauma on top of it, and it's not a good mixture. I had several boyfriends, all who were older, and it just wasn't going well. I was dealing with depression, anxiety. I had eating disorder. I was suicidal, like all of it, all of it.
Wow.
It was hard. And I was driving in the car with my dad. He was taking me somewhere. I don't remember why. Um, but it was interesting because I'm a very strong, independent person, but driving terrified me. And I didn't learn to drive until I started dating my husband. And so my dad drove me places, which now I look back and I'm like, oh, I'm glad he did that because I wouldn't
Yeah.
have had that time with him. Um, because my dad's a pastor, so he's very busy. um, anyway, but yeah, so we were driving and I was just talking to him about like my story, and like he knew my story based on what I had told him. He hadn't sat down and read it, but he knew what I had just told him. Um, and I was talking about something, and my first family story is just so hard. Like it's just so hard. Um, and he looked at me and he said, he was like, you're not responsible. Because that was one thing that I really, really felt. Like, I really felt like I was responsible. I really felt like I had messed up everything by being born, all that. And I think experiencing abuse and neglect from my foster mom and, being told that I was so bad and like, she just really like reinforced that feeling of responsibility when I was in foster care.
Yeah.
And that didn't help. And so he looked at me and he was like, you're not responsible. He was like, you're a victim. He was like, you're a victim of what happened to you. You're a victim of those circumstances. Um, and I never thought of myself as a victim before that. Like I'd always thought of my birth mother as a victim. She was for sure, and she was only a kid when I was born. She's I'm 25. She's 39. So you can do
Okay.
that math real
Yeah.
quick. And So yeah, that was just huge for me. And again, I think it goes back to like just healthy adults. Like I believe that adults need to be real with their children, especially children who've experienced trauma. Like we like I needed my dad to say to me, "This is hard." Because I think sometimes between teenagers and adults, especially, like there's this gap, maybe a generational gap, I don't know. But I needed him to look at me and say, like, I'm a grown up adult and he hasn't experienced the things I have. His life has been typical by most things. And I needed him to look at me and say, this is hard. And another thing that my mom said to me a lot growing up too was, you're a child and these are grown up problems and that's not fair. And that was really important too because I just felt like often my tires were spinning and I couldn't get anywhere and I was so overwhelmed and I just felt like I couldn't enjoy my childhood and like it was just so hard. And then it was so important for me when my mom would come to me and say, yes, this is hard. Like, this isn't fair, because I think that so much of the time, like it's so easy to get stuck in your own little world there. And I know that one experience, and I've had a lot, and I've been trying to work on this in therapy, and I know a lot of people who've experienced trauma of any kind have this, is the events are so traumatic that they don't seem real. And so that's something that I've struggled with a lot, is like, it doesn't feel like sometimes I'm afraid that it didn't actually happen and I made it all up.
Like it
And
feels too
so,
bad to even have been, wow. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing too. So, yeah.
Wow. So what I hear is that they were very validating of you, of your feelings, of your experience, and letting you
Yeah.
know then that it wasn't your fault.
Yeah. 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 And I think that, like, I think an important thing that they did is that they let my brother and I express our feelings. And if we had any questions, they worked very hard to answer them. And they were very honest with us. And they let, like, what I like to say is they let us kind of run the show when it came to that. And it's funny because we were kids, right? So I think as adults, it's not your natural instinct to let kids be in charge. But it was our story. We had experienced it. They weren't there. So why would they get to, you
Yeah.
know? And so they, like, I actually would tell my mom things, and she'd be like, oh, I believe that happened. She would have to, like, you know, and that's kind of when the abuse came out more. And it actually wasn't really confirmed until years later. And nobody, like, it was interesting because, like, nobody really believed me, like social workers, nobody. And then it came out, and I was like, see, like I told you. But my mom always believed me, and I asked her, like, why did you believe me? She was like, because you had been through a lot. Like, I didn't think you would make that up.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Wow.
But yeah, so she tells me now, she's like, it was a wild ride because we kept learning more and more and more. Um, you know. So yeah.
Wow. People often also have told you how brave you are because of all that you've been through, but you have a bit of a different perspective on bravery. What is that?
I mean, I think my perspective on bravery um is not like big and strong, like David against Goliath or anything
Yeah.
like that. Like, that's not what I think. I think that bravery is, you know, I mean, in my opinion, being able to sit here and share your story. That's brave. I think that's what it is. And I know I've written a post about this, and I think that's what you're referring to, but I don't remember. That's really what comes to my mind is it takes a lot of bravery and courage to be able to go back and tell people what happened. Because it is like reliving it again. It is like, going back and, sharing that trauma again and again and again. Um, so yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, and feeling the feelings. Like
Yeah.
this is your story, your personal experience. This isn't you're reliving it. And I want to thank you for that because that is not I can't imagine how difficult that has to be, and yet you're willing to for the perspective of others, for the good of others. But I think that's super important that it's like, even for people who've gone through any sort of trauma, we've heard this from past guests too, and you've shared the same thing, is that you have to actually walk through it in order to get through it, right? Like you have to sit in it and like deal with it in order to heal from it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what my therapist always tells me. She always tells me, she's like, you have to talk about it again and again and again. She's like, it's gonna hurt, and then one day you're gonna find it doesn't hurt as much anymore. And yeah.
Wow. Well, Tina, you also have talked about what you call first family triggers. Can you explain more what you mean by that and some that you have experienced?
Um, can you expound on that a little bit? I'm not
Yes,
really
and
sure what you mean.
we can say this off because you had written something
Okay.
about how when you and your husband had gone back and he said, "Is it okay for you to get out here in this place?" It was like where you used to live, or some movies that you've seen with reunification that are hard. So I think that
Yeah.
my point in bringing that one up is to kind of help us as adoptive or foster parents to understand what kids might experience. Like you're watching a happy family movie and they might end
Yes.
up.
Okay. No, I
So,
understand now. Okay.
okay,
I
I'll
get
start
it now.
back
Yeah.
with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I get it.
Tina, you've also talked about the reality of what you have called first family triggers. Can you expound more on that idea?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, I reunified with my birth mom in September. I think it was September. I don't remember. It was September, I think. And I think since then, the first family triggers have been a lot more prevalent. I think especially in the holiday season, it's so hard. And holidays are hard for anyone. Like a lot of people have difficulty in the holidays. But I think especially as someone who hasn't seen their first family in before I met my birth mom, it was 20 years. It's a long time. Um, this idea, holidays are centered around like family traditions. There is this expectation of happiness and togetherness, and that's just so hard. I remember growing up, I always felt like something was missing. And I think it's interesting because I've had some people reach out to me now and they're like, "Oh, well, you met your birth mom. Like, is this holiday going to be easier?" I'm like, no. Like, just meeting her doesn't fix 2 decades of loss,
Right,
you
right.
know? And in some ways, it's harder because it's like I know she's there, but
Yeah.
well, now I have COVID, so I can't go see her. But, it's like, but, and in some ways, though, I don't, I'm not sure how she fits in, you know? Because it's a lot to process, it's really hard for me, and I see movies about reunification, or I see those videos on Facebook, or just movies about like October Baby, or like just any movie like that. Like I'm just like, no. Like there's this new show on Netflix, I think it's called Maid or something like that. Like everybody was like, "Oh, it's such a great show," and then when my friend was like, "Do not watch this," and I was like, "Yeah, I wasn't going to." And so just like shows like that, like they're so like everyone loves them, but then I'm like, that's my life. Like I don't want to see that. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, yeah, I think the hard part is that sometimes it comes very unexpected, like it's just little things. I think recently, and I'm allowed to share this. And I'm married. I've been married for more than 2 years now, and my husband comes from a very typical family. His parents are married. What I call typical family. His parents
Sure.
are married. He grew up with his parents.
Yeah.
That's typical to me. Like I never
Yeah.
did that. And I think we were watching something, and there was this like toy. And he was like, "Oh, I had that growing up." And I was like, "I don't even know what that is." And he was like, and it was a toy that you kind of had when you're like a baby or something. And I was like, "I don't know what that is." And he was like, "Oh yeah, because when I was playing with that, you were dot dot dot."
Wow.
And so we have a lot of those moments, and sometimes it's very hard, and it kind of like catches me off guard, you
Yeah.
know. Like I think it was yesterday. He was like, when I was creating these like family traditions that for him, he's always grown up knowing the love and joy of a family. And then for me, it was like, I always imagine it as like this crane comes in and picks my brother and I up and moves us over here.
Wow.
And then after court, I remember court, my brother remembers court for adoption. So I think that's one of the main things that my husband and I run into is he'll be like, well, when I was doing this, you were here, and I think sometimes I think it makes him very sad. He feels very privileged.
Yeah.
And I mean, and he is, that's just, I don't know what that's like. And for me, it's normal, and I'll say things to him. I'll be like, oh yeah, when you were doing this, I was da da da. And he'll be like his mouth will just drop open.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot that's not normal for you.
Yeah.
And he'll just like come and like hug me, and he'll tell me, he'll be like, that is not normal. Like, just know that's not normal. And I think that like one thing that I want to share quickly about normal is one thing I've been struggling with in therapy is like this idea of normal and like striving for normal and having it be very frustrating for me because my life will never be normal in the sense of like my husband's life. But then my therapist told me that that was not healthy. And she told me that I need to think of normal as healthy and safe. And and I recently read an Instagram post on that, and that would like everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, yes," because I think that it is right for everyone to have health and safety, and it looks different for everyone, you know. And I think that that is something that I've obtained is health and safety, and that's something that my caseworkers, the judges, police officers, everyone for a while thought would never happen for my brother and I. I recently reconnected with my caseworker and CASA worker, and both of them were like, "You're fine," like, like they were like, "Oh my gosh." Um, so I think that I need to keep reminding myself to keep that idea of normal in my mind because in some ways I've achieved it, and I think that it's so important for people like me or anyone who's experienced trauma or loss, whether that be through divorce or losing a parent or family estrangement or whatever. If you're healthy and you're safe, that's what everyone needs. That needs to be everyone's normal because that's
Oh,
when you can thrive as a person,
that's
you
right.
know. Um, and unfortunately, not everyone's gonna have two parents who are married and all that. And so, yeah, I think that was super important for me.
Yeah, no, that's very important. One, I'm really thankful that you have found a place now of health and safety. And like you said, that's where you can finally thrive. And that's so wonderful. You have said before that people often might come up to you and say, I bet you're so grateful your life is better now because you were adopted. But your reply is generally focused more on your first mom. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I think that's something that a lot of adoptees experience, especially adoptees who come from quote hard places quote. um, you know, there is this expectation of gratefulness, and I think that one thing I always try to do is I kind of try to flip it on people. Like I am grateful, but it's my gratefulness has come from my parents creating an environment where I was allowed to figure out that I'm grateful, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't them telling me every single day, oh, you
Yeah.
need to be grateful, or and they could have easily done that. Like nobody would have blamed them, right? But no, they created an environment where my brother and I were allowed to feel how we wanted to feel about our story. And I think that's essential. I think that must be done. I don't think you can tell your kids how they need to feel, especially about
No.
their stories,
No.
especially when it's not yours. Um, but yeah, so I think that I am grateful for being adopted. I am grateful for the opportunities that it has brought me. Um, but very much next to that gratefulness is just grief and loss. My mom was a child. Um, when my brother and I were adopted, my adopted mom tells me that they didn't even know that our mom was a teenager. They didn't know that she was also in foster care. Um, and this is my little side note here, that if you are adopting a child, as the adoptive parent, you are the top. You're the one everyone's trying to impress. So you need to be asking those questions because they will not tell you things because they want you to adopt that child. And I think that's what happened with my parents, if that makes sense. So information was withheld from them. And later they found out that she was a kid and all these things.
Wow.
And I'm just like, that's just not fair. It makes me really angry, knowing that the three of us were not seen as a family, that we were not respected. Like, we were all in foster care, but we were not together. Like, that just blows my mind. Like, how unnecessary.
Yeah.
Like I can see maybe why that could be done, but there was no reason for it to be done in our circumstances. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had, but I'm also like, I wish that my birth mom had been given the same opportunities
Yeah.
because she 110% deserved them. She
Yeah.
was a child
Yeah.
who was hurting. She was in the same circumstances we were. The only difference was she was like a few years older than us,
Wow.
but she was still a kid. She was still a minor, and very much so a minor. Like she wasn't like, almost 18. No,
Yeah.
she was a kid. And so yeah, it's very hard for me, I think, sometimes. But it's really inspired me to keep going in my life. I remember one time in college, I really just wanted to quit because it was hard. Learning was very hard, with everything that's happened to me, because it was like my abilities to focus have always kind of been compromised, because trauma impacts your brain in deep ways and it makes it hard to concentrate. So if you have kids who've experienced trauma and they're not doing well in school, that's probably why. I'm a teacher, so I have a
Yeah.
lot. I have a lot of thoughts on that. And so, yeah, school was just very hard for me. I love school though, which I think is why I didn't quit because I love school. And my dad, he just randomly Googled something for me. And then he came back and he told me, he said, "Hey, Tina, did you know that only 3% of children who've been in foster care will get a bachelor's degree?" And I said, "No, I didn't know that." And from that point on, I was like, I'm doing this, I'm doing it. And I did it. And I graduated in 4 years. I had a 3.9 GPA,
Wow. Amazing.
top of my class, and I did it all for my birth mom too. Although she never had this opportunity. And through the state of Texas, I have a tuition waiver, and I did not pay for my school at all,
Wow.
because I was in foster care. Um, and so yeah, but just like opportunities like that, like I'm just like, like I'm grateful, but I'm also like, this isn't fair, you know?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think I struggle a lot with survivor's guilt, in that way because, I feel like we all three of us lived through a horrific time, but really only two of us have thrived, if that makes sense. And that's
Yeah.
so frustrating to me
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that, like you said, that gratefulness is right alongside the loss and the sadness.
Yeah.
And because it's the reality, yeah, wow.
Yes.
I think that's such a
Yes.
good perspective. And I think that's where I would love to close us out is anything else that we as foster or adoptive parents need to know when it comes to loving our kids, who have experienced trauma and walking with them.
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, it's so important to see our children's trauma as a part of their story, but not their whole story. And I think I say that because it's something I struggled with so much, is finding out who I am apart from what's happened to me. It's so hard. Like, I feel like that trauma, like, it touches every aspect of your life. But then again, I was sitting in therapy recently, and my therapist was like, well, this may have just happened because it happened. Like, it may not be your trauma. And it's so hard to sort out, like, what's trauma and what's Tina. Like, I don't even know, And so I think it's so important as, individuals who are parenting kids or taking care of kids with trauma, to understand that we need you as the adults who are not in the story with us to help us cultivate our identities outside of that. And it's simple things. And one simple thing that really gets to me, and maybe it's because I'm a teacher, is that when you talk about children in foster care, you say children in foster care. You don't say foster kids.
Yeah.
They're not foster kids. No. They have names. They're children who are in foster care. This is something that's happening to them. It's not who they are.
Yeah.
And it's just simple things like that. Like seeing that they're regular kids. Their lives have just been turned upside down. And I think that's just so important. And part of that, I believe, too, is helping these children develop hobbies and interests, because that was one thing that's been a lifelong struggle for me, is what are my hobbies? What are my interests? Because, I felt like I've been living in survival mode for so long that my brain just is not good at coming out of high survival mode, coming down to, being at peace and at rest. And that's been a struggle for me. So I think it's so important as people who are outside of that and not in that zone to be able to, just keep offering options, offering. And you're probably going to get rejected a lot. Like, just get ready for that. Like, I was the master of rejecting. But I needed that, just like offer. I needed the consistency. I needed adults who are willing to not give up on me, no matter how stubborn and difficult I was, because I was very stubborn and difficult. But that, like, I know people get exhausted in that, and I couldn't do that. I could not be a foster parent. A lot of people ask me, hey, will you be a foster parent? No, why? Like, I don't want to do that. It's hard. But children need you to be consistent, and they need you to keep showing up, even when you feel like they're not even listening. They are. They're listening. They just want to act like they're not, but they are. But I think it's just so important to help your kids develop a personality and identity outside of their story, because, one day they probably will heal, and they're going to want to know who they are outside of that.
Yeah.
Because it's very freeing, and it's really important.
That's so good. So practical too. And I'm right there with you on, let's not put the labels on the front end, right? Let's not label our kids. Like you said, they're children. They're children first and only. They're kids. They've just gone through different things.
Yes.
So I appreciate that so much. I appreciate you coming on today and sharing your story and being willing to walk through that again. I know that's not easy, but I think that the perspectives you've shared today, I know have been helpful to me personally, and I believe that they will be very helpful to our listeners too. And just thank you, Tina, for being you and for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I hope today's episode was an encouragement to you wherever you are on this foster care journey. Now, we want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Also, we have a ton of great content for you over at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see you next time.